They say memory is selective. Mine certainly was. Sitting here now, wheels locked in place beside Louise's hospital bed, I can taste that damn chamomile tea on my tongue. 3 years of bitter aftertastes. 3 years of wondering why my 61-year-old body felt like it belonged to someone twice my age every morning. Should have known. Should have remembered. If you like this story, please follow the channel. That way, you help me bring more stories like this, and we grow with every life. Should have done something 20 years ago, but we'll get to that part. The part where the man I used to be, coward, bystander, fool, finally paid his debt. The part where Maria's delicate hands became something else entirely. The part where falling isn't always about gravity. Let me start with the tea. The ritual. Sean, darling, your chamomile. Maria's voice carried that musical quality that had first drawn me to her 3 years ago. Soft vowels wrapped in something vaguely European. An accent I could never quite place, though I'd stopped asking about it after our honeymoon. Some questions, I learned, weren't meant for asking. The blue ceramic mug, always the same one, appeared beside my evening newspaper with ceremonial precision, 9 o'clock sharp. Every single night, Maria would hover, arranging invisible dust particles on the coffee table, straightening magazines that were already straight, waiting, always waiting. Long day at First National? She'd ask, though she already knew the answer. Banking isn't exactly thrilling dinner conversation, but Maria seemed genuinely interested in my clients, my colleagues, my access codes, my stop. Even now, even knowing what I know, part of me wants to give her the benefit of doubt. That's what makes a good mark, isn't it? The desperate need to believe in the illusion, even when the strings are showing. Morrison account is giving us trouble, I'd say, lifting the mug. Steam rose between us like incense, chamomile and honey and something else. Something that made my tongue tingle in ways that had nothing to do with heat. You work too hard, Maria would murmur, settling into her chair, not beside me on the couch, never beside me. Always watching, always waiting for that first sip, that second sip, that moment when my eyelids would grow heavy and my words would slur just slightly. Drink up, darling. You need your rest. Such a long day. But this particular Tuesday in March, something shifted. Maybe it was the way her eyes lingered too long on my mouth as I brought the mug to my lips. Maybe it was the barely concealed eagerness in her voice when she said, "You look tired." Maybe it was just exhaustion with my own stupidity. I pretended to drink. The performance required finesse, a delicate tilt of the mug, a swallow that was all throat movement and no actual consumption. Years of client meetings had taught me something about deception, though I never imagined using those skills in my own home. Maria watched, waited. When I didn't immediately succumb to whatever chemical cocktail she prepared, her smile flickered, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see something else underneath, something calculating and cold, and utterly foreign to the woman who brought me coffee every morning. Is something wrong with the tea? Just hot. Liar, I thought. Then wondered if I was thinking about her or myself. The discovery 2 hours later, I lay in our king-sized bed, breathing with the artificial rhythm of sleep. Maria had checked on me 3 times, each visit lasting longer than the last. Each whispered, "Sean?" More probing than the previous. "Sean, are you awake? Sean? Sean?" Nothing from me. I perfected the art of unconscious stillness, learned the exact depth of breathing that suggested complete chemical submission. Amazing what desperation can teach you about performance. Around midnight, Maria moved. I heard her footsteps cross our hardwood floor, not toward the bathroom or closet, but toward the window. Toward the corner, where we kept nothing but an old reading chair and Louise's childhood music box. Toward a section of flooring that had always looked slightly different from the rest, though I'd never questioned why. Scrape, scrape, wood against wood. Careful, practice movements of someone who had done this many times before. I risked opening my eyes, just enough to see Maria kneeling beside a section of displaced floorboards, her delicate fingers working with surgical precision. The metal box she extracted was roughly the size of a shoebox, but heavier. I could tell by the way she handled, like it contained something precious and dangerous in equal measure. When she opened it, The contents spilled into view under the hallway light. Photographs, documents, passports, multiple passports with different names, different faces, different lives. But it was the photographs that made my blood freeze. Women, different women, all of them older, well-dressed, financially secure. All of them smiling in pictures that looked suspiciously like wedding photos. All of them looking remarkably like they'd trusted someone completely. All of them looking remarkably dead behind the eyes. Maria selected one of the passports, German, from what I could see, and compared it to something on her phone screen. Her face, illuminated by the device's glow, or an expression I'd never seen before. Satisfied, predatory, the face of someone very pleased with their own cleverness. Who are you? I wanted to scream. What have you done to those women? What are you planning to do to me? But I stayed perfectly still, breathing like a drugged man, watching my wife of 3 years transform into someone I'd never met. The investigation. The next morning brought coffee as usual. Maria's smile was bright, genuine, loving, everything it had always been. If I hadn't seen her rifling through those documents 12 hours earlier, I would have believed completely in her performance. Sleep well, darling? Like the dead, I said, immediately regretting the word choice. At First National, I used every resource at my disposal. 27 years in banking provides certain advantages when you need to investigate someone quietly. Account histories, credit reports, transaction patterns, all available with the right access codes and the right justifications. What I found made me physically sick. Maria Gonzalez, the name on our marriage certificate, had opened 17 different bank accounts across 12 states in the past 5 years. Each account showed significant deposits followed by complete withdrawals, always in cash, always closing within 6 months. The amounts were staggering. $47,000 here, $83,000 there, $156,000 from an account in Phoenix that had been closed just 2 weeks before she'd moved to Baltimore. 2 weeks before she'd met Louise at that coffee shop downtown. 2 weeks before Louise had introduced us, gushing about this amazing woman who was so interested in Dad's work and thought banking was fascinating. Louise. My hand shook as I dialed her number. Voicemail. I tried her office, her apartment, her favorite restaurant. Nothing. No one had seen her in 3 days, not since our last family dinner, when Maria had insisted on cooking Louise's favorite meal. When did you last see your daughter, Mr. Mitchell? She seemed upset about something that night. Did she mention any problems? Any reason she might want to disappear? But Louise hadn't disappeared voluntarily. I was certain of that now. Maria had something on her, some secret, some vulnerability that had been twisted into compliance. And I was the target, the endgame, the final mark in whatever scheme this woman had been running. The memory came back in fragments. 20 years old, living in that cramped Baltimore row house. Thick walls that should have muffled sound but somehow never did. The woman next door who cried too quietly, screamed too loud, apologized too often. I'm sorry. Please don't. You stupid bitch. I told you to have dinner ready. Please, Marcus. Not in front of the neighbors. I'd been 24 then. Young enough to believe other people's problems weren't mine. Old enough to know better. I'd hear the sounds through our shared wall crashes, thuds, sobbing that went on for hours. Sometimes I'd see her in the morning, sunglasses hiding black eyes, long sleeves in summer heat, smiles that never reached past her mouth. Should I call someone? I'd wonder, standing at my kitchen window, watching her hurry to her car with her head down and her shoulders hunched. Not my business, I decide. Probably just an argument. Probably nothing. 20 years of probably nothing. 20 years of telling myself I was too young, too busy, too uninvolved to interfere in someone else's marriage. 20 years of assuming someone else would help, someone braver, someone more qualified, someone who wasn't me. The woman's name had been Maria Vasquez then. Maiden name, I realize now. She'd escaped eventually. I remembered seeing the moving truck. Remembered feeling relieved that the crying had stopped. The screaming had ended. The problem had resolved itself without requiring anything from me. The problems like that don't resolve themselves. They metastasize. They plan. They wait 20 years for the perfect opportunity to balance the scales. And they recognized witnesses, even witnesses who thought they'd stayed hidden. The confrontation. You remember now, don't you? Maria's voice came from the kitchen doorway, soft and musical as always. But her eyes held something different, a recognition, a satisfaction, a sense of completion that made my skin crawl. I was sitting at the breakfast table, still in my bathrobe, staring at the chamomile tea she'd just served, still warm, still bitter, still waiting to drag me under for what I now understood would be the final time. Remember what? I asked, though we both knew the pretense was over. The crying. She moved closer, her footsteps deliberate and measured. The screaming. The sounds that kept you awake through those thin walls in Federal Hill 20 years ago. My mouth went dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus Vasquez, my first husband. Her smile was gentle, understanding, forgiving, and somehow more terrifying than any expression of rage could have been. You lived at 1247 Thames Street. I lived at 1245. You had a blue Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. You worked at Harbor Bank then. Lower position, much smaller salary, but you had prospects. How could she possibly? You heard everything, Sean. Every beating, every humiliation. Every night when I begged him to stop, when I cried for help, when I prayed someone, anyone, would care enough to call the police. I was young, I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I didn't know. I thought maybe. You thought it wasn't your problem. Her voice remained soft, reasonable, the tone of someone explaining simple mathematics. You thought someone else would help. You thought I deserved whatever was happening to me, because good women don't end up with men like Marcus. That's not I never, but it was. Exactly that. Precisely that. 24-year-old Sean Mitchell had heard a woman being destroyed piece by piece and had chosen convenience over courage. Comfort over conscience, had chosen to believe that domestic violence was someone else's responsibility, someone else's job, someone else's moral failing. Where's Louise? I asked. Safe, for now. Maria settled into the chair across from me, the same position from hundreds of evening tea rituals, but everything felt different now, predatory. She's been helping me, you know. Not willingly, of course, but helping nonetheless. My hands clenched involuntarily. What did you do to her? Nothing I didn't have to do. Maria's tone suggested we were discussing weather patterns. Louise has some interesting financial problems. Student loans, credit card debt, an unfortunate gambling habit she thinks no one knows about. Amazing how quickly desperation can transform someone into an accomplice. She threatened Louise. Of course. My daughter's chronic money problems, her secretive behavior lately, the way she'd been avoiding my calls. Maria had found her weakness and exploited it with surgical precision. Louise introduced us, I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. She didn't know who you were, but you knew exactly who I was. I've been watching you for 5 years, Sean, learning your patterns, your weaknesses, your connections. Louise was just the most convenient entry point. Maria gestured toward the untouched tea. Drink up, darling. We have so much to discuss. The choice I stood up instead, pushing the mug away from me. No more games, Maria. No more drugs. If you want to settle accounts for what happened 20 years ago, then let's settle them. But leave Louise out of this. Louise is insurance, Maria said, rising as well. Despite her small stature, something about her presence seemed to fill the entire kitchen. Insurance that you'll listen to my terms instead of doing something foolish like calling the police. What terms? All of it, Sean. Every account, every investment, every penny of your precious banker's salary. You sign the papers I've prepared, transfer everything to accounts I control, and then we take a little trip, somewhere quiet, somewhere private, somewhere you can finally pay the debt you've owed for 20 years. Pay? How? I wanted to ask, but the answer was written in those photographs upstairs. In the faces of women who trusted the wrong person. In the careful precision with which Maria had been drugging me, studying me, preparing me for whatever final act she had planned. And Louise? Louise keeps her mouth shut and her gambling debts get paid. Everyone wins. Except me. Except the man who'd finally learned the price of cowardice. But I had one advantage Maria didn't know about. One piece of information she hadn't accounted for in her 5 years of planning. I'd been transferring money for weeks. Not to hidden accounts or secret investments, but to Louise. Small amounts at first and larger ones as my suspicions. Money she thought was for her debts, but money that was actually insurance, my insurance that she'd be taken care of when this was over, because I'd known it would be over. Had felt it in the bitter aftertaste of chamomile tea, in the way Maria watched me sleep, in the careful questions about my colleagues and clients and access codes. Had known that whatever game we were playing had only one possible ending. I need to see Louise first, I said. Need to know she's safe before I sign anything. Maria's smile widened. Of course, darling. How thoughtful, how protective, how perfectly ... predictable. The warehouse, the abandoned building, sat on the outskirts of Baltimore's industrial district, surrounded by empty lots and broken promises. Maria drove while I sat in the passenger seat, hands cable-tied behind my back, watching familiar neighborhoods give way to urban decay. You're wondering how long I've been planning this, Maria said, her voice conversational despite the circumstances. The answer is, since the day Marcus finally broke my ribs badly enough to require surgery. Since the day I realized no one was coming to help me. Since the day I understood that justice is something you have to take for yourself. I should have called someone, I thought. Should have done something. Should have been better. But regret is a luxury the dying can't afford. The warehouse interior was exactly what you'd expect. Concrete floors, broken windows, the kind of space where screams echo without reaching anyone who might care. Louise was there, tied to a chair in the center of the room, duct tape over her mouth, but her eyes bright with fear and fury. She's alive. That was something. Not everything, but something. Daddy, she tried to say through the tape, the word coming out as desperate sounds that broke my heart into smaller pieces than I thought possible. Now you see, Maria said, producing a gun from her purse with casual efficiency. Now you understand the mathematics of the situation. Your signature on those papers, or Louise learns what it feels like to pay for someone else's cowardice. I looked at my daughter, 28 years old, brilliant, flawed, mine, and saw 20 years of fatherhood condensed into a single moment. Every bedtime story, every graduation, every proud smile, every disappointed frown, every choice that had led us to this concrete floor in this abandoned building, with this woman who'd been patient enough to wait 2 decades for revenge. The papers are in the car, I said. Excellent. Maria gestured toward the door with her gun. After you, Sean. But I didn't move toward the door. Instead, I moved toward Louise. Sean. Maria's voice carried a warning. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I'm going to untie her, I said, continuing forward. Whatever happens next, happens. But I'm not leaving my daughter tied up like an animal. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder. But Maria hadn't fired at me. She'd fired into the air. A warning, a promise, a demonstration of her commitment to this 20-year plan. One more step and the next bullet goes through Louise's knee, Maria said. Then her other knee. Then places that will hurt much worse. Stop walking, Sean. I stopped. That's better. Now, as I was saying, the sound came from above us. Footsteps on the warehouse roof, moving with purpose and coordination. Multiple footsteps. Police? FBI? Backup I hadn't called? Maria's eyes flicked upward, her gun wavering between Louise and me. What did you do? Nothing, I said, which was true. I'd been too afraid for Louise to contact anyone, too concerned about Maria's threats to risk involving law enforcement. But someone else had been watching. Someone else had been planning. The warehouse doors burst open simultaneously from 3 different directions. Baltimore PD in tactical gear, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands that echoed off concrete walls and broken dreams. Drop the weapon. Hands where we can see them. Nobody move. Maria's gun swung toward Louise, then toward me, then toward the advancing officers. Her face showed no panic, no surprise, only the cold calculation of someone who'd always known this moment was possible. 20 years, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. 20 years of planning, 20 years of waiting. And it ends because some banker finally grew a conscience. But I hadn't called them. I was certain of that. Then I saw him. Detective Ray Kowalski, 20-year veteran of Baltimore PD, walking through the chaos with the confident stride of someone who'd expected to be here, walking directly toward me with a smile that suggested this wasn't as much of a surprise as it should have been. "Hello, Sean," he said. "Been a while. Ray Kowalski, my client for 3 years. The man who trusted me with his retirement account, his mortgage refinancing, his daughter's college fund. The man who'd mentioned in casual conversation just last week that he was concerned about some unusual financial activity he'd noticed. Unusual activity. My investigation into Maria's accounts. My clumsy attempts at surveillance. My obvious desperation over the past few weeks. You've been watching," I said. "Protecting," Ray corrected. "When a valued client starts showing signs of financial manipulation, we tend to take notice. When that client starts transferring large amounts to his daughter while researching his wife's background, well, that raises red flags." Maria's laugh cut through the warehouse like broken glass. How wonderfully naive. How perfectly ... typical. Sean Mitchell, saved by the very system he never bothered to use 20 years ago. The gun in her hand moved with deliberate precision. Not toward the police, not toward me, but toward Louise. "But some debts," Maria said, "demand payment regardless of circumstances. The fall, everything happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next." Maria's finger tightened on the trigger. I threw myself sideways, not toward the gun, but toward Louise. Ray Kowalski shouted something I couldn't hear over the sound of my own blood rushing. And Maria smiled, the same gentle, loving smile she'd given me every morning for 3 years. The bullet meant for Louise caught me in the shoulder, spinning me around and sending me crashing into the concrete. But I was between them now, between my daughter and the woman who'd spent 20 years planning this moment. "Daddy," Louise's voice, clear now that someone had cut through her restraints. "Stay down." Ray's voice professionally calm despite the chaos. But Maria wasn't done, wasn't finished with her 20-year plan. Wasn't ready to let justice slip away because of police intervention and guilty consciences. She moved toward the warehouse's broken windows, her gun still trained on Louise, her smile still perfectly, terrifyingly intact. "You want to know the beautiful irony, Sean?" she called out, backing toward the window. "Louise called me 3 days ago, crying, desperate, begging me to help her convince you to pay her gambling debts. No, that couldn't be true. Louise wouldn't. She had no idea who I was, of course. Just knew that stepmom Maria had Dad wrapped around her finger. Just knew that if anyone could convince you to write a check, it would be your loving wife. The police were closing in, their weapons trained, their voices demanding surrender. But Maria seemed oblivious to everything except the words she'd been waiting 20 years to speak. She gave me everything I needed, Sean. Account numbers, passwords, your daily routine, your fears about her gambling. Your beloved daughter handed me the keys to destroy you, and she never even knew it. Louise, I thought, looking at my daughter's horrified face, what have you done? But the answer was obvious. She'd done what desperate people always do. She'd trusted the wrong person with the truth, had believed that family meant safety, that love meant protection, that her gambling addiction was just a problem to be solved rather than a weapon to be used. "I'm sorry," Louise whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of approaching sirens. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "I know, baby," I said, struggling to my feet despite the fire in my shoulder. "I know you didn't." Maria had reached the window now, 3 stories above an empty parking lot. The gun was still in her hand, still pointed in our direction. But her attention seemed focused on something beyond immediate revenge. 20 years of planning, she repeated, and now her voice held something like wonder. 20 years of waiting for the perfect moment, and it ends like this. With police and complications and witnesses who actually care. Jump, I thought. End this. End your pain and mine and the cycle of violence that started 20 years ago. But Maria had other plans. "The debt remains unpaid, Sean," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the warehouse. "But debts have a way of transferring to the next generation. Louise understands that now. Don't you, dear?" The gunshot came without warning. Not aimed at Louise, not aimed at me, not aimed at the advancing police. Aimed at the warehouse's support beam, a calculated shot designed to destabilize the building's already questionable structure. She's bringing it down. The realization hit me like ice water. She's bringing the whole building down. Move! Ray Kowalski's voice cut through the sound of groaning metal and shifting concrete. Everyone out! Now! But I couldn't move fast enough. None of us could. The warehouse had been abandoned for good reasons: structural damage, foundation problems, the kind of issues that make buildings dangerous, even without someone shooting at load-bearing supports. The ceiling beam directly above Louise began to sag. I ran, not toward the exit, not toward safety, not toward the logical choice that would preserve my own life, toward my daughter, toward the 28 years of love and disappointment and pride and fear that had defined my existence since the moment she was born. Toward the choice I should have made 20 years ago when I heard Maria crying through our shared wall. I reached Louise just as the beam gave way. The price spinal compression fracture, T12 vertebra, complete severing of neural pathways below the point of impact, paraplegic. Such a clinical word for such a complete transformation. The doctors explained everything with professional kindness: wheelchairs and rehabilitation, catheters and adaptive equipment. The long process of learning to live in a body that no longer obeyed all its previous commands. They spoke about acceptance and adjustment, about the remarkable human capacity for adaptation, about patients who'd gone on to live full and meaningful lives. They didn't mention the dreams. Every night, I dream about falling. Not the warehouse collapse, that part my memory has mercifully obscured, but other falls. Falling through 20 years of cowardice. Falling through the space between hearing someone cry for help and choosing to help them. Falling through the gap between the man I thought I was and the man I actually had been. But I also dream about Louise. Louise, who moved back home without being asked. Louise, who learned to operate wheelchair ramps and bathroom modifications with the same efficiency she'd once applied to hiding gambling debts. Louise, who sits beside my bed every morning reading newspapers aloud, her voice steady and strong and completely free of the guilt that I'd expected to consume her. She jumped. Louise told me during one of those morning readings. Maria, out the warehouse window. 3 stories on the concrete. The doctors said she died instantly. Good, I thought, and immediately felt ashamed of the thought. 20 years of planning, 20 years of pain, 20 years of waiting for justice that never came. Had Maria found peace in those final moments? Had the fall felt like flying? Had she finally balanced the scales that had been tilted against her since the day she'd married Marcus Vasquez and learned that some prisons have white picket fences? I'll never know, but I think about it. In the long hours between Louise's morning newspaper and her evening return from work, I sit by the window and think about choices. The ones we make, the ones we avoid, the ones that make us, and the ones that break us. The ledger 6 months after the warehouse, Louise brought me a letter. It was in a safety deposit box, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Maria's lawyer said she left instructions to give it to you if anything happened to her. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with my name written in Maria's careful script. Inside, 3 pages of the same elegant handwriting, the final words of a woman who'd spent 20 years preparing for this conversation. Dear Sean, if you're reading this, then my plans have reached their logical conclusion. I'm dead. You're probably injured, and Louise is trying to piece together how we all ended up here. Allow me to provide some clarity. 20 years ago, you heard me crying through our shared wall. You heard Marcus hitting me, humiliating me, destroying me piece by piece. You heard me beg for help, pray for intervention, plead for anyone to care enough to call the police. You did nothing. I don't write this with anger anymore. Anger is an emotion for people who still believe the world might be different than it is. I write this with understanding. You were young, uninvolved, afraid of complications. You probably told yourself that someone else would help, that it wasn't really as bad as it sounded, that good women don't end up with men like Marcus. You were wrong, but I understand why you believed those things. The alternative, accepting responsibility for a stranger's suffering, would have required courage you didn't possess. But here's what you never understood, Sean. Debts compound over time. Every night I spent in that house, bleeding and broken and crying for help that never came, was a night that added interest to an account I intended to collect. Every beating I endured while you slept comfortably in your own bed was another entry in a ledger I maintained with obsessive precision. I didn't marry you for your money, though I intended to take it. I didn't drug your tea for convenience, though it served my purposes. I married you to balance books that had been overdrawn for 20 years. But something unexpected happened during our 3 years together. Something I hadn't planned for, hadn't accounted for, hadn't imagined possible. I started to care about you. Not love. That particular emotion died in Marcus's house, beaten out of me along with so much else. But care, concern, the recognition that you weren't the same man who'd lived at 1247 Thames Street. That 20 years had taught you something about responsibility, about connection, about the weight of choices made and unmade. Louise accelerated my timeline. Her gambling debts provided an opportunity I couldn't ignore, a way to access your accounts and complete my 20-year plan ahead of schedule. But using her felt wrong. Wrong in ways that should have been impossible for someone like me. So I made a choice, Sean. The same choice you made 20 years ago, but in reverse. I decided to care. By the time you read this, you'll know that I brought down that warehouse intentionally. What you won't know is why. Not revenge. Revenge would have been simpler, cleaner, more satisfying. This was something else. This was me choosing to fall instead of pushing you. This was me finally understanding that some debts can only be paid by the person who incurred them. This was me realizing that 20 years of planning had led me to exactly the same choice you faced in 1983. Here, someone crying for help, or choose to help them. I chose to help. Take care of Louise. Sean, she's not responsible for my choices, or yours, or the cascade of consequences that brought us all to that warehouse. She's just a young woman who made desperate decisions for understandable reasons, exactly like I did 20 years ago. The ledger is balanced now. The debt is paid. What you do with the rest of your life is up to you. But for what it's worth, I forgive you. And I hope someday you'll forgive me too. Maria P. says, the money I took from your accounts is in a trust fund for Louise's future. She never need to gamble again. The morning Louise is reading to me from the Baltimore Sun when she reaches the obituary section. She always reads the obituary, says. It helps her appreciate being alive. Appreciate the simple gift of another morning, another cup of coffee, another chance to get things right. Listen to this one, Dad, she says, and her voice carries something I haven't heard in months, something that might be peace. Maria Elena Vasquez, 47, passed away peacefully after a long illness. Born in Barcelona, Spain, she immigrated to the United States in 1995 and worked as a translator before her retirement. She was preceded in death by her parents, Carlos and Elena Vasquez, and is survived by numerous friends who remember her kindness, her generous spirit, and her unwavering commitment to helping others overcome difficult circumstances. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Baltimore Domestic Violence Prevention Center. Services will be private. Rest in peace, Maria. You are remembered. Louise folds the newspaper carefully. Did you know she was born in Spain? No, I say, which is true. I'd never known that. Never known about the parents who'd preceded her in death, the friends who remembered her kindness, the generosity that had somehow survived 20 years of planning revenge against a stranger who'd failed to help her. The obituary doesn't mention a first husband, Louise continues. Doesn't mention Marcus or Baltimore or any of the things that happened to her here, because that wasn't her story, I think. That was just the chapter that brought her to us. Do you think she wrote it herself? Louise asks. The obituary, I mean. Do you think she planned that too? Probably, I say, and find myself smiling despite everything. Maria was very thorough. We sit in comfortable silence, watching morning sunlight stream through windows that Louise cleaned yesterday, illuminating a room that she's made into home again. The newspaper lies folded between us, full of other people's stories, other people's choices, other people's attempts to make sense of lives that often resist comprehension. Dad? Louise's voice is quiet, uncertain. Do you hate me? For what I did? for how I helped her without knowing I was helping her. I look at my daughter, 28 years old, brilliant, flawed, mine, and see not the desperate woman who'd unwittingly provided Maria with the tools for revenge, but the child who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, who used to believe that problems could be solved with hugs and good intentions. No, baby, I say, I don't hate you. I love you, and I'm proud of you for asking the question, because that's what courage looks like now. Not the grand gestures of heroes and martyrs, but the quiet decision to face uncomfortable truths, to acknowledge mistakes, to choose honesty over comfort. 20 years ago, I heard someone crying for help and chose silence. Today, my daughter asks if I hate her for making desperate choices, and I choose truth. The ledger isn't balanced. It never really can be. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to keep trying, keep choosing, keep failing and succeeding, and falling and getting back up. Maybe the point is to remember that every morning brings another chance to hear someone crying for help. And maybe, just maybe, to choose differently this time. Epilogue. 1 year later. The letter arrives on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored envelope with my name in familiar handwriting. For a moment, my heart stops, impossible thoughts racing through my mind about women who fall 3 stories and survive, about elaborate plans that extend beyond death, about debts that compound even in the grave. But when Louise opens it, we discover something different, something unexpected, something that feels like grace. Mr. Mitchell, my name is Dr. Elena Santos, and I was Maria Vasquez's therapist for the final 6 months of her life. She asked me to send you this letter exactly 1 year after her death, along with the enclosed documents. Maria spent our sessions working through 20 years of trauma, 20 years of planning, and ultimately, 20 years of learning to forgive. She wanted you to know that her final choice, the choice to bring down that warehouse, with herself inside rather than you, wasn't motivated by revenge or guilt or even justice. It was motivated by love. Not romantic love, but the deeper recognition that you had become, in her words, the father Louise deserved, the man Baltimore needed, the person I could have been if Marcus hadn't broken so much of me so early. She wanted you to know that watching you investigate her background, watching you try to protect Louise despite your obvious fear, watching you choose to run toward danger rather than away from it, had taught her something about the difference between the man you were at 24 and the man you became at 61. She wanted you to know that people can change, that courage can be learned, that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. The enclosed documents establish a scholarship fund in your name at the University of Baltimore Criminal Justice Department. Maria funded it entirely through money she'd acquired over the years. Her instructions were specific. The scholarship should go to young people who've made mistakes but are committed to helping others, to students who understand that the justice system works best when operated by people who've learned from their own failures. She thought you'd approve. I hope this letter finds you and Louise well. I hope you've both found ways to carry forward the lessons that tragedy taught you. And I hope you understand that forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing who you want to be in the future. Maria chose to be someone who protected the people she loved, even at the cost of her own life. What will you choose to be? Sincerely, Dr. Elena Santos, P.S. Maria asked me to tell you that the chamomile tea was her grandmother's recipe. The bitter taste you noticed wasn't from sleeping pills. She only drugged you twice, both times with mild sedatives when she needed extended time to access your accounts. The bitter taste was from a Spanish herb called Manzanilla amarga. In English, it means bitter chamomile. Maria said you'd understand the symbolism. Louise finishes reading and looks at me with eyes that hold 28 years of shared history and 1 year of shared recovery. So what do you think, Dad? What are you going to choose to be? I look out our window at the Baltimore street, where people walk past carrying their own burdens, their own secrets, their own chances to help or ignore, to care or turn away, to become better versions of themselves or remain trapped in patterns they established decades ago. The Maria Vasquez Mitchell Scholarship for Second Chances. It has a nice ring to it, I think, I say, reaching for the phone to call the university. I'm going to choose to be someone who answers when people cry for help. Louise smiles. The first real smile I've seen from her in a year, and begins to dial. Some stories end with revenge. Some stories end with justice. This one ends with two people who learned the most profound transformations often come from the most unexpected teachers. This one ends with chamomile tea that tastes bitter and sweet in equal measure. This one ends with the understanding that falling isn't always about gravity. Sometimes it's about grace. And on Tuesday mornings in Baltimore, when the sun streams through clean windows and daughters read newspapers to fathers who've learned to listen, that feels like enough. That feels like home. That feels like the beginning of a story worth telling. Thank you for staying with me and listening this far. Your attention is a gift. Did these minutes mean something to you? Then please follow the channel. Every click from you is a push that helps me keep bringing stories that truly stay with us.